Hello everyone, welcome to this third live stream class of this introduction to Buddhism and meditation. So the format for these classes is we're looking at some of the concepts in Tibetan Buddhism, how to use them to deal with the challenges that we face in our life. We'll do some guided meditation and then have time for questions at the end. So in the last class, we looked at the practice of patience. So patience is a positive mind which is able to remain undisturbed by any type of suffering. So with patience, we're able to stay peaceful, we're able to behave rationally, regardless of what difficult conditions we're facing. And we looked at the two types of patience. First is the patience of not retaliating. So this is the capacity to tolerate harm without angrily striking back. So we're able to deal with somebody criticizing us, hurting us, harming us, without becoming angry and retaliating. So the problem with anger is that when we're angry, we respond in we're extremely agitated, we have no peace, we're out of control, we lose our perspective, we harm others. But if we're able to practice patience, then we have a stable, peaceful mind in the face of harm. Then the second type of patience that we looked at is the patience of voluntarily enduring suffering. So this is a capacity to take on any difficulty and turn it into our spiritual path. So instead of being overwhelmed and consumed by our difficulties and our sufferings, with this type of patience, we use problems and difficult experiences to actually lessen and remove our negative minds and the sufferings that's caused by them. Because we can never control all other people, all situations, we will always experience difficulties. The only thing that we can control is our response to problems and difficulties. And a way to do this is to respond to them with patience. So today we'll look at the concept of impermanence. We need to recognize impermanence because not recognizing it is a cause of stress and tension for us. Because recognizing impermanence is a wisdom mind. We're developing correct understanding. And correct understanding leads to happy states of mind and ultimately self-transformation, which is the goal of meditation. So impermanence, it's the fact that everything that's produced is subject to change. So products are created by causes and conditions. So for example, if we think about a table is made of wood which is put together by nails. The wood depends on a tree growing, which depends on a whole lot of conditions to come together. The nails depend on mining for the iron and somebody making the nails, then somebody putting the wood and the nails together to create this product, which is a table. Subject to change means it's actually changing moment by moment and will ultimately finish. So the table, it looks like it's solid and permanent, but it's actually moment by moment, it's changing, eventually will finish. Same with our houses, our cars, even our jobs, our relationships, people, all these are changing moment by moment, eventually will finish. So we use this term impermanence to apply to any phenomenon which has the characteristic of disintegrating moment by moment. So for this reason, something can be both enduring as well as impermanent. So for example, a house is produced from a variety of parts, causal actions and conditions, and it endures for a certain time, but it can't sustain itself permanently. Eventually, it will disintegrate into rubble. Now, intellectually, we can accept this concept of impermanence because it is common sense. But emotionally, intuitively, we don't actually get impermanence because we relate to things as if they are permanent. And the fact that we don't truly get impermanence is demonstrated by the fact that we feel a sense of shock or we get upset when things change. We resist change, we feel a loss. And in fact, the most stressful events that we face are related to change. So, for example, relationships finish, or somebody's health deteriorates, or somebody dies. And while these are difficult circumstances, our suffering is actually increased by not truly understanding impermanence, and in fact, by resisting impermanence. Even good changes, like we have a promotion in our job, or we get married, or we move house, these we still find stressful because they are changes. And the fact that we experience a sense of shock or stress indicates we're not seeing impermanence as natural and anticipating or expecting the reality of impermanence. We cling to permanence. And this is because our minds don't perceive stretches of time all at once in one moment. We think things are static, they're never going to change. For example, our relationships with people, our youth, even the mood that we're in. We get caught up in that and we think it's going to remain the same. But when we think like that, we're actually creating unhappiness and problems for ourselves. But actually recognizing impermanence and meditating on and remembering impermanence leads to us then having a more open, a more dynamic, a realistic perspective. We're not living in denial. So everything that's produced is impermanent and changing all the time. And some changes are obvious. Children grow up, people grow old, buildings fall apart. If we think of our house, we're continuously doing repairs to our house. The environment, there's a complete change in the environment from one season to the next. Other changes are more subtle, like mountains or countries or planets, continents. They come into existence, they change constantly, eventually they'll disintegrate. They appear fixed, a mountain appears really solid and fixed, but it's actually undergoing subtle changes continuously. Also, our mind is constantly changing. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're full of love. So our mind's going from one idea to another, one emotion to another, constantly moving. Also, our personality is changing. You think about your personality now compared to your personality, say, 10 or 20 years ago. So what you're like at any time is the accumulation of your experiences and your actions over time. There's no fixed, unchanging you. So everything that we relate to, the environment, our body, our mind, our personality, is impermanent. And impermanence is illustrated by this saying from the Buddha: collection ends in dispersal, rising ends in falling, meeting ends in parting, birth ends in death. So collection ends in dispersal. So no matter what amount of wealth and possessions that we gather, eventually they will become lost. So our family home, our furniture, our clothes, our jewelry, eventually all these will be lost. Even if we manage to retain them during this life, at death, they'll be dispersed amongst our relatives. And in fact, the greatest fortunes in the world have all been dispersed in this way. Rising ends in falling, the highest eventually becomes lower. So prime ministers aren't re-elected, presidents are disgraced, great empires lose their colonies. Meeting ends in parting, so no relationship lasts forever. We will be separated from our friends, from our family. If we think about all the relationships we had with our friends when we were in school, these have all now finished. But even if we're in our relationships, if we're not separated by the circumstances in this life, we'll be parted at death. And finally, birth ends in death. So nothing can prevent death. Everyone who's lived in this planet has previously died. Even the most famous, powerful people have died. Kings, queens, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad. No amount of power or pleading or friends or money can prevent death. Then from a Buddhist perspective, not recognizing impermanence is actually a foundation for negative states of mind to arise. And as we've seen, negative states of mind are by nature unhappy. They cause us suffering. So, for example, if we see something or someone as attractive, we have a longing or a grasping for it, we feel we need it to make us happy. At the time that we have this grasping for it, we feel that it is permanent. We don't see the reality, which is that it's temporary. We exaggerate the qualities, we see it as a permanent object. In our hearts, that's the way we feel, and we become very attached to it. Now, this gives us the illusion that something is stable and secure, that we can rely on it because it's always going to be there, it's never going to change. This is how it appears to our mistaken mind. And so we become attached to it, we cling to it. Then, once we have this attachment, this is what sets us up for so much disappointment and pain. Because the thing that we think is permanent and unchanging is actually changing moment by moment. And then at some point, this gross impermanence becomes evident to us. It finishes or it changes. And then we think, this is not supposed to happen. This relationship isn't supposed to finish. So we can see how this grasping at permanence causes the attachment. And then, because this attachment is actually out of sync with reality, when reality becomes evident, so when the object or the person's impermanent nature is evident, then we experience a lot of pain. Then, for example, if someone criticizes us or hurts us or harms us, we get angry. At that time, we're not seeing it as a temporary situation, temporary words which have gone, a temporary situation which will pass. Instead, we feel the situation is solid. We are permanent, the other person is permanent, the way it appears is the way it always is. We feel it's not going to change, it's not going to disappear, which is not true. Then when we have difficult situations, we have a headache, or we have relationship problems, or work problems, we feel unhappy or down. At that time, we feel we will always have this problem. Things won't change to something better. You know, when we feel down, we have this weight in our mind, and we feel this situation is permanent. Also, not recognizing impermanence, and approaching situations with a feeling of permanence actually prevents us from seeing those situations clearly. So, for example, in a work situation or a situation with a group of people or an activity, the more clearly we can recognize that it is actually dynamic, the more we can see that it is changing, the more we're clearly recognizing how the situation actually exists. But the more we feel it's permanent, the more we will approach it in a static way, which is completely unrealistic. Now, we can think that this constant change of things is frightening. But when we really understand that this is actually the very nature of things to change, then we can become more realistic, fearless, more balanced, and more accepting. Now, the thing is, we understand that things are impermanent on an intellectual level, but something stops us from really getting it on an emotional, or on an intuitive level. We have it in our head, but intuitively, we still want things to be stable and permanent. We're surprised when things end. We're surprised when objects break. We're surprised when the stock market changes. And all these things are big changes, and that's gross impermanence, let alone subtle impermanence. So while we have an intellectual understanding, but innately how we approach life doesn't match this intellectual understanding. So what causes this gap between what we know intellectually and what we actually know intuitively? So this is a type of ignorance, a not knowing. There's some ignorance obscuring our mind, so that even on a day-to-day level, we don't see things clearly. So in this thing of impermanence, we're blinded by ignorance. The problem with knowing something just intellectually is we know something's going to change, but then our mind sort of grabs harder onto it, to try to make it stay the same. And that's when we get full of worry and anxiety. But if we can really understand that impermanence intuitively, then we become wiser. Then rather than trying to make something permanent that's impermanent, so that we keep our attachment to it, we then release the attachment and the clinging. And in this way, we release the worry and the anxiety about losing it. Then, when we're free from worry and anxiety, then we're much more open to enjoy what's there when it's there. It's interesting, we're not that good at enjoying things when they're there. We're not usually very present in our life. We're usually living in the past and in the future. But just enjoying something when it's there, knowing it's going to change, that's much nicer. Because when it's there and when it goes, we have no clinging, we have no worry. Then the worst consequence of not recognizing impermanence is we take our life for granted. So we are products because we are dependent on causes and conditions. So it means our life will finish. And in fact, our lives are so fragile. A small thing can be the cause of our death. Someone coughs and we can so easily get the coronavirus. A small blood clot causes a heart attack. Car accidents happen so easily. Someone loses their concentration just for a few seconds and it results in a loss of life. Like the truck driver who lost his concentration and 4 people died. And then things which normally support us can also cause our death. For example, food. A food allergy can cause death. Food poisoning can kill us. We think food is going to nourish us, sustain us, but it can be the cause of death. But because we feel that things are permanent, we feel death is somewhere out there in the future. We only have a superficial awareness of death. It's not directly connected with us. When we hear of someone's death, we're like a spectator, as if dying only happens to other people. Death feels like it's a distant place, a distant time. We assume our death won't occur until some time in the distant future. So we live our life as if we're going to remain in this world forever. But this is unrealistic. No one has escaped death, and we're not going to be the exception. So in fact, there is a definite end point. So each day is actually one day closer to the end point. But we don't know when that end point is. Sometimes children die before parents, young before old. There's no definite order. So each day is one day less of a finite number. That's actually growing smaller and smaller each day. But what is that number? Is it one day less of 5 years, 1 year, a month, a week? We don't actually know. Now, you might think this is a depressing way of looking at things, but if you think, for example, of the law of gravity, we know that because of gravity, if we were to let go of a cup, it will fall down and it will probably break. Now, we don't say gravity is really depressing. If you let go of a cup, it'll fall and break. We just make allowances for it. Same with impermanence. We just need to accept the reality of it and make allowances for it. So having this realization of impermanence and death is not to make us, morbidly obsessed with death or make us paralyzed with fear of death. The reason for contemplating death and impermanence is not to bring us more pain and suffering for us. These teachings are actually to lessen our suffering and to bring more and more happiness. Because we can maintain an awareness of impermanence and still work, look after our families, practice cultivating positive minds, practice the path to enlightenment. And how we do this is by using this awareness of impermanence skillfully. And when we can do this, we can reduce our attachment, our grasping, our anger, our ignorance, our arrogance. If we see impermanence, then we'll approach each situation as impermanent, and this will naturally lead to more happy states of mind, more open minds, wiser states of mind. Because actually realizing impermanence, this is a wisdom mind, because it's more aligned with reality. Our attitude, our approach is based on a correct premise. If we base our approach on an incorrect premise of thinking that things are permanent, we're guaranteed to set ourselves up to be continuously disappointed, and to suffer. So, for example, if we can see relationships as temporary, impermanent things, this in itself will weaken the grasping aspect, the wanting to possess. So if we can lessen the attachment, we can still relate to the person of the object, but when it changes, we won't have such a shock, because we haven't been clinging onto it as being permanent and always there. So, we can see that remembering impermanence helps us to cut the attachment. It lessens the attachment and increases the real love, because we see the relationship, we see the person as precious. Then, for example, if someone criticizes you, if we can see the impermanence of the situation, the impermanence of the person, this can help lessen your anger. Then, if we're in a difficult situation, we can have more patience and tolerance because we see it is impermanent. This will definitely finish, so I can be patient with it. If we look at this situation of the coronavirus, in the beginning, when it was getting worse and worse, we couldn't see the end. It felt permanent. But if we could have remembered that this too is something that comes into existence due to causes and conditions, therefore its very nature is that it changes, it's not going to relax forever, then this could have helped us to relax. We didn't have to have so much aversion to it. And now we can see that things, in fact, have changed. It is getting better. Some restrictions are being lifted. We also should remember impermanence when we're experiencing good conditions. For example, our new possessions, they will wear out and be thrown away. Even our precious human relationships will change and eventually disappear. So when we can do this, we won't be so attached to our possessions, so we'll be more relaxed. We'll enjoy them without being so attached to them. And we will value and appreciate and look after our relationships because we know they are impermanent. So the reason for thinking about impermanence is so we can live our life in a happier and more meaningful way. So we can see, for example, someone might experience the sudden, early, unexpected death of a close loved one. They didn't get a chance to show them how much they loved them, how much they appreciated them. So they have a lot of regret that they didn't do this. But because of this experience, they then appreciate the other people whom they're close to. They learn to show their appreciation, their love for them, look after them more. And they've learned this the hard way by first unexpectedly losing someone close to them. This is post-traumatic learning, but we can have pre-traumatic learning. And this is the reason for us to think about impermanence. Why can't we learn to appreciate the people we're close to now by realizing impermanence? We can. This is why the Buddha taught impermanence, to give us the learning and to generate the appreciation before we go through the trauma. Then if we have this learning and we appreciate and show our appreciation of the people that we're close to, then when they go, we don't have any regrets. Yes, we grieve the loss of them, but we don't have the strong regret that often comes with losing someone unexpectedly. That we didn't look after them properly, or we didn't appreciate them. We didn't show them our gratitude and our appreciation. So this is why we contemplate and try to actually realize impermanence. Then from a Buddhist perspective, we don't take our days for granted. We want to know, what are you doing with your life? What is meaningful? We don't want to become preoccupied with trivial, mundane activities. If we think things are routine because we've always done that, or what others expect you to do, this is a lack of wisdom or clear intelligence if we approach our life in this way. So recognizing impermanence, then with our life, we recognize that our time is precious. And this recognition is energizing for us. If we truly recognize impermanence and that our life is impermanent, Rather than being just an intellectual understanding, it will completely transform the way we lead our life. It will help us not to be so anxious, so frustrated, so weighed down by the minor problems and challenges in our life. So an awareness of death can completely remove our trivial attachments, our regrets, our grievances. It gives us perspective. So by reflecting on the fact that we will definitely die and the time of death is uncertain, we come to realize that our life is very precious. So we can look, for example, at our life. The average life, say, is 75 years. We spend about 8 hours a day sleeping. So this is a third of our day. So 1/3 of our life is 25 years. So we spend 25 years of our life sleeping. Then we spend 8 hours a day working, whether it's in a job, in an office, or whether we're at home. So that's another 25 years of our life we spend working. Then we spend 4 hours a day maintaining our body. So we have to eat, which means we have to cook, which means we have to shop. Then we have to wash our body, we have to look after it, we have to exercise it. So that's another 12 and a half years. So then after all this, we have 12 and a half years left to do what we want. 12 and a half years of discretionary time. So are you a quarter of the way there? Are you halfway there? Are you 3/4 of the way there? Say we're halfway there. So we have 6 years left. 6 years left of our life after sleeping, working, maintaining our body. 6 years of discretionary time. What are you going to do with this time? Are you going to use it up watching bad TV shows? So we want to use it in the most constructive way possible because our situation and our opportunity are rare and precious. And we do this through cultivating our positive minds, through meditation, through awareness. If we can do this, then the happiness that we generate through cultivating positive minds, through meditation, will then permeate the 8 hours a day that we spend working. We will be more relaxed, more calm, more patient at work. The 8 hours that we spend sleeping will be in a more relaxed and healthful way because we're less stressed and less anxious. It will help us in the way that we approach the maintenance of our body. So doing these positive actions with our discretionary time starts to make the rest of our time also a happy, peaceful, positive experience. So we need to use this precious time in ways that brings real happiness for ourselves and others. But will we all definitely get 75 years? Not everybody makes it. Some people only live to 12 years, 35 years, some to 50. But everybody thinks, not me. For example, if you ask the person who died at 35 when they were 34 years old, if they were planning to die at 35, they'd say no. But the reality is no one knows how long they're going to live. Human life is so fragile. Our body has to keep working in a particular way to keep functioning. A tiny change can stop it functioning. It's not under our direct control. So having decided that we're going to spend our disposable lifetime on cultivating positive minds, and then realizing we don't actually know how long we have left, we need to realize that we have to start now. If we procrastinate, then if we remember that death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain, then this allows us to move our minds away from anger, attachment, jealousy, and so on, into more joy, more compassion, more concentration, more wisdom in each moment of our life. So understanding impermanence is a good way of focusing your mind on what's essential in life. So then we need to ask, well, what is actually meaningful? So the fact that we're going to die and that we're not going to continue to exist forever, this acts as the mirror. that makes us ask ourselves, what am I doing with my life? What is of value in my life? At the end of my life, when I look back, what will I have rejoiced about having done? What will I regret having done? We don't want to live just on automatic, doing things what we're supposed to do, what other people expect, and then get to the point when we're at the end of our life and say, what did I spend my whole life doing? But if we can evaluate our life with that mirror of realizing it's not going to last forever, so what's really meaningful, this is what helps us get very clear on what's important and what's useless. It can make our mind clear, quite strong then, in following what we know to be really true and really meaningful for us. And it can really invigorate our life. It gives us a lot of courage and enthusiasm to live our life in a much more satisfying way. So we then start to analyze what's meaningful, and then understand that what is meaningful to us, and then bringing that into our life each day, each moment. So if we want to be a more compassionate person, a kinder person, a wiser person, whatever's meaningful to us, if we actually recognize impermanence, then we will actually do it. We will embrace the opportunity and so be more satisfied for having embraced, what is meaningful. Then at the time of death, we'll have no regrets. Also, by understanding impermanence, we'll understand not only that change happens, but also that we can bring about change. Because our minds are impermanent. We can remove our negative suffering-producing minds. We can strengthen our positive happiness-producing minds. We have the power, to realize our true potential, to develop and to transform our minds, and therefore to bring real transformation in our lives. Okay, so we'll do some meditation now. We'll do a meditation to try to understand the concept of impermanence, to have a more intuitive, heartfelt feeling for impermanence. Okay, so sitting in the meditation position, just to remind you, the meditation position is whether you're sitting on the floor or on a chair. The main thing is to keep your back upright and your spine straight. Place your right hand over the left, your thumbs just touching and then resting in your lap. Your mouth is closed and your jaw relaxed. Rest the tip of your tongue at the back of your top teeth. Your head is fairly straight and just slightly bent forward. Don't put it too far forward, you'll fall asleep. Don't tilt it back, you'll get agitated. Fairly straight and just slightly tilted forward. Your eyes are half closed and gazing down, unfocused. If you find that too difficult, then you can have them slightly open. Your shoulders are level, and by resting your hands in your lap, your elbows should be slightly away from your body. So we begin with generating as positive an intention as possible for our meditation. So I wish to be free from suffering and to have all happiness. Everyone else has the same wish for themselves. So I meditate now not just for myself, but to attain freedom from suffering and all happiness, so that I'm then able to lead all other beings also to this enlightened state. So we begin with a few moments of breathing meditation. So breathing naturally and normally and just placing your attention on the breath. The whole process of breathing. Sensation of the breath as it passes through your nose. Slight movement of your chest and your stomach. Place your attention on that process. Letting go of all your problems, your worries. Gently focusing only on the breath. If you lose your concentration and your mind wanders off, be aware that your mind has wandered off. See where it's gone to. Gently let it go. Come back again to the breath. Feel your mind start to settle and become still. Then while you're observing your breath, beware of impermanence and the changing nature of things. Be aware of the constant movement and change of your breath. How one breath leads to the other. Continuously moving, changing. By being aware of this constant movement and change of your breath, helps you to have more of a feeling for impermanence. Then we can reflect on the impermanence of the environment. Trees, flowers, crops are constantly changing. They're growing, they're decaying, they're renewing, they're flowering, and so on. As the seasons change, all the trees change, flowers change. Moment by moment, day to night, season by season, there's continuous change. Houses and cities are built. Eventually they disintegrate and become rubble. Hills and mountains and valleys seem solid and permanent, but actually erosion changes them bit by bit. The planet changes, oceans rise and fall. Land masses appear and disappear. Even planets arise, eventually disappear. Nothing remains static. Then imagine the passage of a river. So visualize a river flowing. You're watching this river flowing. It is one continuous flow of water, but at any instant, it's never the same as it was immediately before. There's continuous movement, continuous change. And the river itself changes through its passage. In some places, it meanders placidly. In other places, it rushes down as a busy torrent. In some places, the river is broad. In some places, it's narrow. In some places, the river is deep. In other places, it's shallow. In some parts of the river, it flows straight. In other parts, it's twisting and winding. Visualize this river flowing, continuously moving, continuously changing in its passage. By reflecting on a river in this way, we can gain a feeling for and an insight into impermanence. It helps us to let go of the clinging and grasping at permanence. And when we have a feeling for impermanence, concentrate on that feeling. Then we can use the river as an analogy for our mind. I think your mind is the one stream of consciousness. It's never the same in the present instant as it was in the instant before. There is continuous change and movement. At times our mind is placid, calm. Sometimes it feels turbulent and agitated. Sometimes we feel broad and expansive. Sometimes our view is narrow. Sometimes we are deep and tranquil. Sometimes our perspective is shallow. Sometimes our mind, our view is open. Other times we're closed. At times we are straight, strong, direct. Other times we can be a bit indirect. Maybe even a bit twisty. So by reflecting like this, we gain a feeling for and an insight into the impermanence of the mind. We let go of the clinging and grasping at permanence. We generate this feeling for impermanence. Maintain it, concentrate on it. Okay, so so these are some examples of how you can meditate on impermanence. Other possible meditations on impermanence that you can do you can reflect on the subtle impermanence of your body. See how your body changes, over time, from the time you're a baby to the time you're a young person, to then getting more mature and so on. Then think over time, your body gets thinner or it gets fatter, it gets more conditioned or less conditioned. It can be more healthy or less healthy. So think about your body is constantly changing over time. The movement, the change, of what otherwise appears to be solid and fixed. If we reflect on this, it helps us have a feeling for the impermanence of our body. Then you can think about, the impermanence of your personality, and think about what you were like when you were, say, 20 years ago. Imagine meeting yourself as you were 20 years ago. What were you like? How would you react to yourself? So these are other types of meditations or contemplations that we can do to give us a feeling for impermanence. So homework for this week is to meditate each day for about 10 or 15 minutes and include a meditation on impermanence. You can do what we did, meditate first of all on the impermanence of the impermanence of your breath when you're doing breathing meditation, then reflect on the impermanence of your environment, all the different ways the environment is changing, and then meditate on impermanence, visualizing the river, the continuous flow and change of the river. And then, this gives you a feeling for impermanence, and then you focus on that feeling that you generate, from your meditation. If you'd like to find out a bit more or review the subjects of impermanence, you can have a look at the Essence of the Path to Enlightenment book, which is our reference for this course. So that's this book by Geshe Acharya Thubten Loden. If you look on pages 37 up to 46, that has an explanation of impermanence and death. And the other bit of homework I'd like to give you is for you to think in your day-to-day life, to try and remember impermanence of the situation, in any difficult situation that you find yourself in. Somebody's being difficult, or something difficult happening at work, or with your family. At that time when you're experiencing the difficulty, try to remember the impermanence of that situation, the impermanence of that difficult situation, and see how that changes the way that you respond to the situation. See how that releases your tension, your agitation in that situation. Okay, so do you have any questions or comments on this session today? Or anything else that we've done in the past few weeks, or any questions you might have about your meditation practice or the application of the concepts that we've been talking about in the last few weeks? Hi, Vince. Good to see that the sound and the video are coming across well. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Yes, the analogy of the river, I think Kerry is referring to in the meditation. It's a really powerful image. It really brings the feeling for impermanence, to our mind. And that's what we're trying to do here, to get it not just as an intellectual understanding, but have a real genuine feeling for impermanence. And this is where it then starts to affect the way that we actually see things. So yes, I agree. It's a very helpful analogy. Thanks for all your feedback. Thank you. Now, does anybody have any questions about your daily meditation practice? I hope you aren't trying to do some, meditation each day on the subjects that we're covering. Do you have any comments or questions on how you're going with that? Yes, Nicola. Remembering impermanence in these difficult times, it's so helpful. Because as I mentioned, it seemed like it was never going to go. It was just getting worse and worse and worse at the beginning with this coronavirus. We thought we'd have to have more and more strict restrictions, and then, but if we could have remembered impermanence, we would have thought, okay, this is actually going to finish, because it's a product. It's created by causes and conditions. It is going to finish. So we can be a bit patient, try and relax and not be too anxious and stressed by it. If we could have kept this in mind, at the beginning, it would have been helpful for us. Thanks, Gail. Okay, now next Sunday is Mother's Day, so there won't be any classes next Sunday. So I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. So remember to do your daily meditation and try to apply these concepts in your day-to-day life. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.